on contemporary poetry. But let me just go over just the same. So on what contemporary poetry is, like it departs from the traditional form and content. When we say traditional form, of course, this is a type of poetry that we have been used to. And mostly when we think of traditional poetry, we're looking into the into the classics. But of course, because we do not really have a reference other than to look at that traditional form in relation to what we have now in contemporary writing or contemporary poetry in particular. Of course, in simple language, contemporary poetry can be said to be the poetry that we have now in this day. It's in this day and age. And of course, when we talk of that one, we cannot delineate or we cannot separate it from technology because we're now into the technology age and we cannot let it be not that way because we're into it. Okay. So another distinguishing characteristic of contemporary poetry is it offers social critique. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'll not be talking about the well-known poets, contemporary poets, but I'd rather dwell on the ones that we have right here and now. Of course, in this assembly, we have poet Sarkar and poet Michael Forrester, who are supposed to be contemporary writers. And of course, Michael Forrester is one of those who writes using social critique. Okay. And then, of course, the next correct. I'm sorry for mentioning our esteemed poets, but I guess I've already asked permission and to Michael Forrester at least. But for Shankar, I think he'll not disagree with that one. Yes? Can I hear you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, okay. So, and then of course, introspection, experimental form, and traditional sources for inspiration. And the free verse, which was already mentioned earlier by Professor Lolita. Then she also made mention of inconsistent meter, variations upon standard rhyme, abandonment of classical musical style, variations on the conventions of poetic lines, and an otherwise inconsistent regard for standard poetic structure. Having said this, there are poets who also do use meter and even rhyme, okay? The ones that we have who write in this day and age. But because of what has been said earlier, the absence of a rhyme, rhythm, meter, nevertheless, contemporary poets use poetic devices like imagery, metaphor, simile, and internal rhyme. Metaphorical writers that we have today who are very known to me are Michael Forrester, of course, and Shankar. Sound devices are also used like alliteration, consonants, assonance, onomatopoeia. I forgot to include here anaphora because anaphora is very much part of today's literature or poetry writers. And of course, also Professor Lolita earlier made mention of archaism. There's no better place for archaism, of course, other than in poetry. And sound patterns of archaic words are, of course, helpful, such as the ones mentioned earlier, assonance, alliteration, anaphora. Okay, so there is also this impact of technology on contemporary poetry. And while others would disagree, I would like to think that poets this day and age connect around the world, around the globe, universally around the universe because of the emergence of technology. That's why we also have the emerging term called digital literature, and digital poetry, of course, is one of them. And there's no better way, I think, this day and age where one can really prosper one's writing other than on using technology, particularly on social media, which is very accessible. Sorry for disagreeing, Madam Lolita, but we could see a lot of poetry groups online, and the fear is only that our social media, particularly Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, have been flooded with too many poems of this day and age, such that the flooding may come to us as if in a destructive form of a flood. That's why it's now very difficult, really, to choose as to which one is supposed to be a good poetry in this day and age and which one is not. Although what I'm driving at is, even if many of us have been learned and been schooled in the classical poetry compared to the ones that we are having now, I can say that good quality poetry does not only come from the classics. Why? You may ask. Because we have contemporary poetry, and it is the poetry of this day and age. And whether contemporary poetry is good or not remains to be seen. And because, with contemporary poetry, there are a lot of criticisms. Many would call it bad poetry, especially those that sound like as if they are letters composed that we compose on email. But then what others call bad poetry will soon be gone, and not all are remembered. 100 years or 200 years from now, what will be left will be mostly those that are read because they are worth reading, which only means that they are well written. Thus, they are able to stand the test of time. Hence, the timelessness of literature, the timelessness of poetry. Okay, I think that ends my presentation, except that I would like to, invite the audience attention to one of the poems composed by his very own Shankar, which is titled Handful of Dust. And you can see here, which I have actually emboldened the words, the referent words. And poet Sankar uses a lot of anaphora in this poetry. Let me just run through his poem. Actually, this is a title of one of his poetry books, which I had the distinguished honor of writing the foreword. And you can see the repetition of words in his poetry that makes words be connected to each other to give emphasis to the poetry. Sorry, I didn't ask Professor Sankar permission to share this one, but I'm sharing it just the same. And then there, the repetition of words. And yeah, and this is how our contemporary poets write this day and age. And it is not true that our contemporary poets write in very short verses. Actually, this poem by poet Sankar is very long. He started with Okay, I'm sorry. It's very long. I'm not just sure how many lines there is, but I did use a lot of slides for it to be presented to you here. So there are more than like 5 slides. And the other one, which I would like to invite your attention with, is the latest book by Fawad Shankar, and it's titled As the Paradise. Notice how he uses anaphorically the contracted term for I am. So the I am in Sankar is also one of the traits of contemporary poets today. And it is short of going into con- confessional poetry. Okay, I don't know if you are familiar with confessional poetry, but this is almost going there and there. Look at the I am contracted, and notice also that later on in the poetry, the I becomes the we. There we are. See, a very good presentation of the I in the poet Sankar. I also should have loved to share with you. I think I've run out of time. I was only given 15 minutes of the time to share. And I think I'm done with that one.
Ma'am,
I
you
also
can
would like
continue. You can continue. You can
yeah.
complete your presentation.
Yeah,
Please,
I'm
it will be an
actually done
honor.
because, uh-huh. And but before I continue with the rest of my presentation, I'm sorry to say that I was not anymore able to put them on slides. But before I continue, I would like to thank Dr. Ray, who is here with us, and it's the first time I'm meeting him online, because he did really a very good review of the book that I co-authored, the poetry book titled A Triangle of Love, which I co-authored, of course, with poet Sankar and poet Michael Forrester. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, so to continue, because I know poet Michael will not take it in good, in good heart if I did not share some of his poetry. That, as I've said earlier, I will not dwell on the ones who are very well known. I'd like to honor the poets that we now have in this assembly. And let me share one of Michael Forrester's work, which is titled Before Abraham. And apologies, because I was not, as I've said earlier, I was not able to put it on slide because the past few days I was not really feeling well. I just really did declare myself well tonight to be with all of you. So let me share my screen once again. And sorry. Okay, this is Michael Forrester's poem Before Abraham, and I would like to invite the attention of everyone just so I could illustrate how anaphora is being used utilized by our contemporary poets. There, he also has the I am in his poem. And you will notice later, this is how the quality of contemporary poems have been, from Michael Forrester, from Sankar to Michael Forrester. They do have good poems to pride themselves with. You will notice also that the I am there would later become the we there, just like how poet Sankar presented his handful of dust. Okay, another I mentioned earlier that poet Michael Forrester writes on social, themes. And this one, which is a very popular in the Philippines, at least for students of the University of Makati, and it's titled Taking Refuge. And you can see how the poet, it's some sort of a criticism, but it's not really presented as a criticism, but how he despised or disagreed, or how the term there would be delineated the fear and the how do you call this, the can you help me out, Michael, the exact word for your poem Taking Refuge. And this poetry, while it appears like as if it's a social criticism, nevertheless it was taken in good light, in good taste. And this is a favorite of our students at the University of Makati, and it was even presented through a rap. It was presented as a rap, and that is how our contemporary poets writing their poetry, how their poetry is being taken by the generation X, the Z generation, okay, using technology. That's why I was saying earlier that we cannot do without technology this day and age. We cannot bring back technology away or put it on our backs, away from us. Okay, let me show you how technology has been part of this. Will like somehow give some somewhat, I wouldn't want to call it an intermission, because this intermission, if it is an intermission for me, with the permission, of course, of the group from Hitaishi, can I share this performance of our students in honor of the poem Taking Refuge by Michael Forrester? Am I allowed to do that?
Sure, ma'am, sure. We would
Okay,
love to
thank you
hear
very-
the technology
Okay.
coming into the poetry.
Okay. So this is, thank you very much for that. And because, oh no. Okay, do you see my screen? Hello? No, not yet.
Not yet, ma'am.
I'm having a hard time sharing my screen. There, here it is. Wait, yeah. I hope you like this.
These 3 people were killed by this bomb in this neighborhood. This is Omran. He's alive.
The audio is not clear, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I guess I'll have to suspend sharing in that case. Do you hear it?
Yes, yes, now we can. But the
Very
screen is
clear.
not being shared. But screen is not visible
But I'm
now.
afraid I don't know if it's going to be as clear. But let me try to share again.
Sorry, ma'am, audio is not there. We can't hear the sound in the video.
Okay, so I guess I'll have to. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So there. So oh, I'm sorry.
Hey guys, real quick, let me. Any courses are on sale for up to 85%.
So what I'm pointing at is even with the criticisms that we get from everywhere around the globe because of that quality of contemporary poetry, which is not within within the quality of what is called traditional poetry or the classics. Nevertheless, if poetry is written by heart with mind and spirit in it, then it's going to be taken with open arms by the X and the Z generation with technology in it. With that, I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was an immense pleasure listening to you. And I think the explanations of all the different literary devices that are used in the contemporary poets was extremely well explained by you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Us too. Thank you so much. I now request the Vice President of Hitaishi Group, Dr. Seema Sarkar, to introduce us to our special guest.
Thank you, Shantani. I think our guest speaker has already introduced Michael Forrester through his poem on screen. And the rap also she tried to present by her students. But anyway, as the customary, I have to tell the audience about the writer in a proper manner. So here I'm talking about Michael Forrester, that he was born with a pen in his hand. I think this is very right thing if I can say about him. He writes at the fulcrum of perceived reality with 8 books in print, ranging from the inspirational and provocative Forest Rain to the metaphorical epic fantasy poem Dragon Song, from his exploration of our endangered plant in the travelogue One Journey to the ever popular story of his first year with his hearing dog, Matt, if it wasn't for that dog. His books are followed worldwide from Australia to California, from the Philippines to Wales. Michael is 65 years old and is profoundly deaf. He lives in the UK between the southern edge of the New Forest and the sea. He obtained his master's from University of Oxford. He's a full-time author and public speaker, traveling internationally to speak inspirationally and, sign his books for readers. Michael's own life journey has taken him from formative years in charismatic Christianity through the onset of deafness and the life-changing arrival of a hearing dog. Through a miraculously survived suicide attempt in 2002 into a spiritual awakening. He has traveled the planet from the Amazon rainforest to South Africa, from the Himalayas to the Philippines and beyond. And Michael Forrester's books are available at his website as well as on Amazon. So here I invite Michael Forrester to speak to the audience today.
Mr. Forrester, we request you to unmute yourself and speak to us, please.
How's that?
It's fine, sir. Sir, you have been unmuted once again.
So please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I can hear you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Dr. Sarkar, for having me here today. I feel doubly honored now to be a participant speaker and also to have featured as a poet. So great blessings and thanks to you for including me today. We're here to talk about contemporary poetry, which I see from the flyer that went out with the invitations that we deemed to start in 1920. And I think I can see an argument for that, certainly. After all, it was in 1921 that T.S. Eliot, the nearest person that poetry has to a deity, was writing the unheroic couplets of the Wasteland. I had not thought Death had undone so many, writes Eliot, with considerable input from Ezra Pound, of course, as he sweeps away all those poetic conventions from the 19th century of rhyme, meter, rhythm, you name it, it all changed with the Wasteland. Only you could argue that it started a year before that with W.B. Yeats in 1919 and Second Coming with its pitiless manticore vexing us to nightmare by a rocking cradle and slouching its way to Bethlehem to be born. In fact, if you really want an argument, why not go back further and say it was Wilfred Owen that started it all in 1917, when he wrenches the British public out of jingoistic complacency with Dulce et Decorum Est. And he says this: if in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cudder vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, Dulce et decorum est pro patrim mare. We speak too much of death. Perhaps we can find respite from our tears if instead we talk of the poetry of birth. So let's fly forward to London, 1944, where we find the Irish poet Louis MacNeice, devastated by De Valera's decision to keep Éire neutral in the Second World War. He's writing propaganda for the BBC. And at home, in the silence of the blacked out evenings of the Blitz, as the fire grows cold for the lack of rationed coal, he's thinking not of his generation, but of the next. And he pens prayer before birth. I'm not yet born. I fear that the human race may with tall walls wall me, with strong drugs dope me, with wise lies lure me, on black racks wrap me, and bloodbaths roll me. I'm not yet born. Rehearse me in the parts that I must play and the cues that I must take. When old men lecture me, bureaucrats hector me, Mountains frown at me, lovers laugh at me, the white waves call me to folly, and the desert calls me to doom, and the beggars refuse my gift, and the children curse me. I am not yet born. Oh, hear me, let not the man who is beast or thinks he is God come near me. Let them not make me a stone, and let them not spill me, otherwise kill me. No respite from passion and tears here either then. The time's against us, so let's slide forward to the post-war Wales of 1949, where a poet is sitting in a locked writing shed in Lagern on the Gower coast. Locked, that is, from the outside by Caitlin Thomas, desperate that her husband Dylan should write something, anything, a play, a story, an essay, a poem, anything that she can sell to pay some of his debts and feed his long-suffering family. For Dylan Thomas cannot be said to be a temperate man. He's an astonishing, commanding intellect, but he's also raw, elemental, driven by the old Welsh gods of valley, rock, and stream. And who knows, perhaps in a former life, it was he that penned the Mabinogion. But here he is now on this starless Bible black night, staring down on a fishing boat bobbing sea, drawing deep from the wells of passion until down into his waiting pen there flows this. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage at the dying of the light. The wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage at the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse me, bless me with your fiery tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Do not go gentle. Arguably the most powerful villanelle ever written. For whether Dylan Thomas sculpts a poem, a play, an essay, or even a letter to the local newspaper, everything this man writes is pure energy, pure passion, pure poetry. But the clock whips us forward. Had we time, we might talk of D.H. Lawrence, W.H. Auden, C.D. Lewis, but there is no time and we must fly. Are we really going to pass over Sylvia Plath? There she is, beating her fists on the desperation of the glass of the bell jar, until in 1963, in one of poetry's saddest acts, she puts her head in a gas oven. Her estranged husband, Ted Hears, will barely speak of it until 35 years later. In 1998, he pens birthday letters. But now we must fly back across the ocean, for no one does it quite like Sylvia Plath's countryman, Charles Bukowski. In 1963, as Sylvia lies dying, Bukowski's roaming the night streets in search of a drugstore that will sell him a fifth of rye. For Bukowski cannot write sober, and he cannot write unless he's chain smoking. He's a barfly who produces his best work after a brawl and abroad. An admirable man? No, hardly. But he spat out his fire in more than 5,000 poems, not to mention at least 500 he estimates were lost in the post on their way to magazines. For Buck refuses to keep copies. Does that take arrogance or class? Probably both. In 1964, he publishes Everything. The dead do not need aspirin or sorrow, I suppose, but they might need rain. Not shoes, but a place to walk. Not cigarettes, they tell us, but a place to burn, or we're told. Space and a place to fly might be the same. The dead don't need me, not a living. But the dead might need each other. In fact, the dead might need everything we need. And we need so much. If only we knew what it was. It's probably everything. And we'll all probably die trying to get it, or die because we didn't get it. I hope you'll understand when I am dead, I got as much as possible. Shall we stop for Pablo Neruda? Gabriel Garcia Marquez calls him the greatest poet of the 20th century. In 1972, a year before he dies, Neruda publishes La Muerta, the dead woman. If suddenly you do not exist, if suddenly you no longer live, I shall live on. I do not dare to write it. I shall live on. For where a man has no voice, there my voice. Where blacks are beaten, I cannot be dead. When my brothers go to prison, I shall go with them. When victory, not my victory, but the great victory comes, even though I am mute, I must speak. I shall see it come, even though I am blind. No, forgive me, if you no longer live, if you, beloved, my love, if you have died, all the leaves will fall in my breast. It will rain on my soul day and night. The snow will burn my heart. I shall walk with frost and fire and snow and death. My feet will want to walk where you are sleeping, but I shall stay alive. Because above all things, you wanted me indomitable. And my love, because you know that I am not only a man, but all mankind. And would we pause for Linton Kwesi Johnston's Hurricane Blues and listen as the words dripped like honey from his tongue? Sadly not, if for no other reason than I could never do justice to his amazing Jamaican voice. When next, when time is too emulous a mistress to allow us another lover than herself? Shall we reach Vikram's Seth? Soon, we shall reach him in soon. I shall die soon. This thing is in my blood. It will not let me go. It saps my soul for food. It soaks me night sweats and breaks my days in pain. No hand or drug can treat these limbs for love or gain. How am I to go on? How will I near this taste? My throat cased in white spawn, these hands that shake and waste. Stay by my steel ward bed and hold me where I lie. Love me when I am dead and do not let me die. There are so many poets whose shoulders we'd like to peer over while they work. Would we sit and chat a while with Benjamin Zephaniah and Len Sissay? And why not while away some time with Bob Dylan, Rod McEwen, or Leonard Cohen, all of whom teach us we segregate poetry from song at our peril. But there is no time. I remember giving a reading in the Philippines in 2017. We'd arrived 2 hours late, courtesy of the Manila traffic, and the young audience, bless them, had waited patiently. So when I finished, I wasn't expecting too many questions. But one that I remember did come when a young man standing at the back spoke up, and in his poet's uniform of flat cap, waistcoat, and baggy trousers, he asked me a question that I'll always remember. What is the social responsibility of a poet in this society? I had just a few seconds to answer. Now, I was a guest in the Philippines and aware we were skating on thin ice with this question. But I said what came into my mind and what resonated as true to me, which I think is itself a lesson for writing poetry, is it not? And I said, the social responsibility of a poet in this society is the same as in any society. And that is to tell it as it is. For though we choose our battlegrounds with care, if we do not tell it as it is, if we do not speak our truth, why are we speaking at all? And what gives us the right to call ourselves poets? Whether we prefer rhyme or free verse, structure or stream of consciousness, the vocation to which we are all called is the same. To roar out our clarion calls, be they about the power of love, be they about birth or death that unites us in our mortality, be they about the rape of our planet, be they about the searing injustices we confront at every turn, the responsibility of the poet remains the same, to tell it as it is. Our planet, as Bukowski might say, is burning in water, drowning in fire. So rage against the dying of the light, because that is how we offer up our prayers for the unborn right now, for freedom, for a life, for a planet still worth living upon. Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who died earlier this year, said this: if you would be a poet, create works capable of answering the challenge of apocalyptic times, even if this means sounding apocalyptic. You are Whitman, you are Poe, you are Mark Twain, you are Emily Dickinson, you are Neruda. You can conquer the conquerors with words. So roar out your creed arms, you warriors of the pen. Tell me about a world that spins fairground horses up to Pegasean flight. Tell me about a world where rich men dine on paupers' bones and drink the cellar dry. Tell me about a world where flame and flood and pestilence put that world to the sword. Deliver your words with a right hook to the stomach that wins me out of my complacency. Don't do it because you'll be admired. Do it because it's your unique truth and nobody but you can say it quite the way you do. Because that is how you add your unique contribution to the river of poetry. If you do that, 100 years from now, your name will be there, writ large in poetry's hall of fame, and they will say of you, he spoke his truth. She said it as it was. Their truth lives on, and that is why we remember them. That is why we honor them, because that man, that woman, that human was a poet. We've time to make just one final stop on this lightning-paced journey, to sit at the feet of Somali poet Warsan Shire. In 2009, she visits the Somali embassy in Rome, now occupied, abandoned and occupied by refugees. And the night before she arrives, one of them jumps to his death from the roof. Warsan Shire is 21 years old, and she will never be the same again. She writes of it immediately, but not until 2017 does the poem flourish into home. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. Your neighbors running faster than you, breath bloody in their throats. The boy you went to school with, who kissed you dizzy behind the old tin factory, is holding a gun bigger than his body. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one leaves home unless home chases you away. Fire under feet, hot blood in your belly. It's not something you ever thought of doing until the blade burned threats into your neck. And even then you carried the anthem under your breath, only tearing up your passport in an airport toilet, sobbing as each mouthful of paper made it clear that you would not be going back. you have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one burns their palms under trains, beneath carriages. No one spends the days and night in the stomach of a truck feeding on newspapers, unless the miles traveled mean something more than the journey. No one crawls under fences. No one wants to be beaten, pitied. No one chooses refugee camps or strip searches where your body is left aching, or prison because prison is safer than a city of fire, and one prison guard in the night is better than a truckload of men who look like your father. No one could take it. No one could stomach it. No one's skin would be tough enough. The go-home blacks, refugees, dirty immigrants, asylum seekers, sucking our country dry, niggers with their hands out. They smell strange, savage. Messed up their country, now they want to mess up ours. How do the words, the dirty looks, roll off your backs? Maybe because the blow is softer than a limb torn off, or the words more tender than 14 men between your legs, or the insults easier to swallow than rubble, than bone, than your child body in pieces. I want to go home! But home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun. Home! No one would leave home. Unless home chased you to the shore, unless home told you to quicken your legs, leave your clothes behind, crawl through the desert, wade through the oceans, drown, safe, be hungry, beg, forget pride. Your survival is more important. No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ear saying, leave. Run away from me now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Forrester. We are really indebted to you for your time. Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to our ears listening to you recite the poems, really. Before I introduce our next guest speaker, I would like to inform the participants that they can post their questions in the chat box or the Q&A box so that we can have a question answer round after this. And the feedback link will be posted after the last lecture is over. So please stay connected with us because you will get the certificates on the basis of your filling the feedback forms. I would now take the privilege to introduce our next guest speaker, Dr. Daniela A. Trechkowska.
Hi, I'm here.
Yeah. Dr. Daniela A. Trechkowska was born in Bitola, North Macedonia. She is a well-acclaimed poetess, scientist, editor, literary critic, doctor of pedagogy, university professor. She works at the Faculty of Education, Bitola, St. Clement, or she also works at St. Clement or Christi University, Bitola, Republic of North Macedonia, and teaches the courses Methodology of Teaching Language Arts, Creative Writing, Critical Literacy, Methodology of Teaching Early Reading and Writing, etc. She is co-founder of the University Literary Club, Denistra PFBT UKLO, and also the Center for Literature, Art, Culture, Rhetoric, and Language at the Faculty of Education, Bitola. She is a member of the Macedonian Writers Association, Macedonian Science Society, Bitola, Slavic Academy for Literature and Art in Varna, Bulgaria, Bitola Literary Circle, and she was president of the Macedonian Science Society Editorial Council for 2 mandates. She is editor-in-chief of 2 literary journals, Rust, Growth, issued by Bitola Literary Circle, and the international journal Contemporary Dialogues, issued by Macedonian Science Society, and editor of Literary Elements Journal. She is also the writer of several poetry and prose books. Besides her scientific work published in many international scientific journals, over 100 articles to be precise, 3 university books, critical literacy, educational leadership trainings. She writes poetry, prose, and literary critics. She has published 1 prose book, Coffee, Tea, and the Red Sky in 2019, co-authored 1 poetry book for children, and authored 9 poetry books, Word About the Word 2014, Poems for the Margins 2015, Black Dot in 2017, Footprints 2017, 3 in 2019, House of Contrasts in 2019, Electronic Blood in 2019, Math Poetry 2020, and Walking on an Aerial Line 2021. Her book Electronic Blood is translated into Arabic language by Raid Anis Al-Jishi and published by Ravashin Publishing House in UAE in 2021, and English language in India in 2021. Treskovska is a co-author of the poetry book Dandelion Cadence, published in India in 2021. Dandelion Cadence, published in India 2001. She has won special mention at the Norcity World Poetry Prize, UNESCO, in 2011, the award for the best unpublished poem at the Macedonia Writers Association Festival in 2018, first Sansky Prize for Prose 2019, National Karamanov Third 2020 Uzbekistan, Macedonian Literary Award Grant in 2020, Premio Mondial Tutola Renato Filippilli in Italy in 2021, International Award of Excellence, City of Galatio Antonio di Ferraris, Italy, Rome 2021, and the most important national award for poetry, Ako Shopov by Macedonian Writers Association in 2021 for the book Math Poetry. Her poetry was published in a number of anthologies, literary magazines, and journals, both at home and abroad, and her works are translated into more than 38 languages: English, Serbian, Slovenian, Croatian, Bosnian, and the list is endless almost. She has translated many literary works from English, Serbian, and Bulgarian language into Macedonian and vice versa. Thank you, Dr. Daniela, for your time and coming with us, joining us this evening. Thank you so much. It's an honor to listen to you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for the invitation and congratulations for this great seminar that you are organizing. I'm really honored and excited that I can speak in front of you today. And I hope that I can shed some light on the theme of contemporary literature from a perspective of a poetess and an editor of 2 prestigious literary magazines in my country, Republic of North Macedonia. As you already said, I have PhD in pedagogy and methodology of teaching language and literature, and I work as a university professor at St. Clement University, Bitola. We're living in a time of expansion of the information. Mass media are taking our lives captured in a virtual reality. We pay taxes to ourselves because of the globalization and capitalism, and constant drive for making money made us live in a fast food culture. How are we, as poets of today, inspired to write poetry? And what kind of poetry is that? As an editor of 2 magazines in Macedonia and as a translator, I noticed that contemporary poetry reflects somehow the society that we live in. War, pain, freedom of speech, love, all kinds of restrictions, and the fall of democratic societies, corona pandemic, all of that is in the poetry of contemporary poets. Because the poets are somehow mirrors of the societies that they are living in. And we shouldn't forget that we all live in the global society. For instance, I noticed that the depiction of the cruel reality in the poetry written by Syrian poets, the lucid, modernistic overtones with nuances of magical realism in the poetry of Arabic poets, the calm narrative lyrical expression interwoven with unexpected twists and turns, as well as the lucid and brave poetic code which beautifies the depicable in the poetry of Slovenian poets. The nature as a lyrical code for expressing profound philosophical thoughts in which the lyric I is absorbed by the environment and becomes an indivisible whole, which in turn is transformed into aesthetic signal in the poetry of the Vietnamese poets. The static poetic motifs from which a sharp thought is excerpted in the poetry written by the French poets, the concern of many points about the survival of the planet's ecosystems and the humankind in general, the philosophical and existential issues in the poetry of Indian poets, the importance of our ancestors for all of us, the truly engaging poetry written by the Albanian poets, who by means of metonymic constructions highlights the non-human features in human relations, the oniric depictions of reality by Armenian poets, the reflexive and scientifically descriptive poetry of Chinese poets, and so on. And I agree with Professor Janet Pasquale that contemporary poets use rich figurative language. We can indicate lots of instances of anaphora, epiphora, alliteration, comparisons, metonymy, personification, metaphor, and so on. But what I noticed is that many modern poets use shocking and brave metaphors by implicitly comparing two incomparable things. And oxymoron is more frequent than in traditional poetry. It is like this modern way of living, the freedom of speech is being reflected in the poetry as well. I could keep my attention to this topic for this occasion, but I decided to give myself a more complex task and try to answer the questions. How is poetry seen from the perspective of some very well-known scholars and from the perspective of the contemporary poets themselves? What is the relationship between the poet and his poem, or poetess and her poem? So the title of my text is Birth of a Poem Through the Poetic Lenses of Contemporary Poets. Democritus says, everything the poet writes in a state of enthusiasm and divine inspiration is truly beautiful. Plato points out the person of the poet who could not sing unless he is in trance. He thinks that the poet is a person who can communicate with God. The poet is a medium that helps God's words to come to the ordinary people. Poet is a God's servant, according to Plato. Poetry creation is a process of making something to come out of the non-existence and to come in existence. Aristotle has the opposite stand by saying that the basis for art creation lies in the human's desires for imitation the real world and the feeling of rhythm and harmony. There should be a unity between the matter and the form for the poesis to happen. The matter can take different kinds of forms and it contains all of the possibilities, dynamics, and the artist only chooses one of the forms, and that specific form is the artist himself. Heidegger says that there is a special bond between the creator and the piece of art. The creator is the superior one because he's older than the art. And the basic feature of the art piece is its ability for opening to the reader. Therefore, reception of the poem is not a simple perception. It is opening toward the truth, and if the art piece wants to live and to keep its coherency, it needs its readers, its guards, as much as it needs its creator. According to Mukarzhowski, poetry was born out of word, out of poetry of other poets, the development of other artistic expressions, and the aesthetic values that a society respects. Freud thinks that the process of creation is a result of sublimation, i.e., as a result of defense mechanisms, and Jung that creation is happening when the artist connects with the collective unconscious. There are two kinds of creation. The first one, in which the creator is in total control of the object of creation, and the second one, in which the object of creation is in control of the artist. The unborn art in the soul of the artist is the natural force that uses tyranny or subtle cunning, not thinking for the general good of the artist, says Jung. In spite of such a typology, Jung claims that although artists might think that they are in control of their own creation, the truth is that they have been delusional. They have been led by the collective unconscious. The one who speaks with ancient images speaks with thousands of voices. He goes deeply beyond the essence of things, and it raises what is personal to what is human civilization. And how a poem is born from the perspective of the poets. We can often hear someone saying that a poet is able to listen to the silence, to see the world from a new perspective and from an unexpected angle, to take risks in the use of the figurative language in order to create a poem that is unique and original. Is Aco Shopov, one of the most eminent poets, Macedonian poets, says in his poem Silence, if you have something unsaid, something that burns inside, bury it in deep silence. The silence will tell itself. Art is a subjective manner of articulation. It is a process of disciplining the chaos that attacks all of our senses. It is the art that protects our personality from impersonalization with the help of our inner being that always watches us in order to be sure that we are doing fine, just like mothers do with their children. I just cited Blaže Koneski. He is one of the most important Macedonian scholar, linguist, poet, and academician of the 20th century. And as a matter of fact, we celebrate 100 years since he was born. And he's the most important linguistic for Macedonians. What Octavio Paz thinks of a poetry creation. He says, poetry creation begins as violence over the language. The first act of that operation is consisted of tearing the words from their root. Poet cuts their umbilical cord that connects them to their everyday use, and thus the words, being separated from the monolithic world of everyday speech, they become unique again, as if they were just born. The second act is returning the words to the language, and the poem becomes an object of co-act. Poet does not choose the words. When poet finds his word, he recognizes it because it has already been in him, and the poet has been in the word itself. The word becomes one with the poet's essence, and the poem is consisted only of the necessary words, nothing more and nothing less. That is why it is so difficult to make a correction of a previously written poem, because each correction is a new creation, says Octavio Paz. In the process of creation, poet is not aware of the recipient, as John Stuart Mill says. And Jonathan Cowler often cites Mill's thesis that the poem is a sentence that has been overheard, and in each act of poetry creation or reading, there is a voice that articulates the words. That means that each poem has its own music. The author does not tell the poem. He must invent a voice that tells the poem, hoping that it will help the readers as well in the process of reading. Poetry is such a state of the speech that aims to squeeze, to darken the transparency of the poetic text, to give the text its freedom from reference, but that does not mean that the text is free of meanings, and to become closer to the expression that is pure without any adornments and additions. And that is the music itself, says Professor Venko Andonovsky. He has PhD in literature. He teaches at the university, at the oldest university in the Republic of North Macedonia. And he was my professor. Rabindranath Tagore, I'm not sure whether I pronounced it well, but it is, very well Indian poet. He sees the creation of the poem through the search of God, and the God or the creator is the one that whispers through the poem. And if a poet somehow develops haughtiness, he might want to add some poetic elements that, in his opinion, will increase the aesthetic appreciation of the poem, and that can stop the voice of the creator. And as Tagore says, my song has put off her adornments. She has no pride of dress and decoration. Ornaments would mar our union. They would come between thee and me. Their jingling would drown my whispers. My poet's vanity dies in shame before thy sight. O master poet, I have sat down at my feet. Only let me make my life simple and straight, like a flute of reed for thee to fill with music. The most prominent poet in the 20th century, coming from Serbia, and his name is Vasko Popa, has said that although many people often ask him how the poem is born, he does not have the answer yet. I cite his words. They ask you how a poem was born. Why they don't ask the rock how it made the stone, or the bird how she brought to the world her babies, or the woman how she gave birth to her child. And you, as a poet, can tell them about your habits related to the poetry creation. In fact, you will speak about your behavior prior to the poem, the only one that you're aware of, the one that can be observed. But for the sake of God, you will not tell them a word about the process that goes on inside you. And that is not because you don't want to speak about it, but it is because you have no clue about it. Your part in the process of poetry creation is a mediating one. You intermediate for the poem that is being born inside you. You help her to see the light of the day. You help her survive alone without your help. You help her to become independent, to live without constraints and to act. And that is not either small nor easy task to do. And he continues, where is your place as a poet while writing a poem? Somewhere where the space is not behind your heels. Somewhere where the time has not forgotten you and you haven't forgotten the time. Somewhere where you have forgotten even yourself. And where is your place after you have written the poem? It is certainly not in the poem. Can you imagine finding lumps of soil that have been feeding the apple tree? Maybe your place is behind the poem. No, it is not. Your shadow would fall over the poem and you will make her blurry. Your place is under the poem, deep down, like a soil that feeds the plant. Your poem is a secret that was conceived in you. And when she was ready to be born, you spoke her, just like that. If you could only knew what that secret means, you wouldn't be bothered with the process of birth so much. And the others would answer, and not you. Whether that secret can be perceived or acknowledged, or we should just make ourselves her prisoners. You see your poem that has flown away from your hands. You keep silent, you rest a little, and you let her free. You let her answer all of the questions. You let her be her own answer. You can only talk about her either because you're the first of your poem, which doesn't mean that you're the most competent one. There are many wiser, more experienced, and more objective readers among those who ask you, what is the meaning of your poem? Alan Bosque has similar views on this question. He says, my just written poem tells me, move away, there is no place for both of us here. The poem swallows its poet and finds out that he's indigestible. Atanas Vangelov, also Macedonian poet and scholar, says in one of his poems, I pushed my body gently towards the spring, and when I joined my lips with the water, someone drank all of my excitements, my worries. Someone mysteriously took my ability to speak. I abandoned the spring silently. I abandoned the spring with a deep sorrow. Was it my poem that was so clear, transparent, and independent? Can she go on with me, without me? Vasile Igna, Romanian poet, says in his poem, it stopped snowing. I hear the trembling of the words. A cries for I. K cries for E. This is an evening without candles. The poet's fist is heard by each word. My eye is on the sky. The dream is a witness. The poet is seen like someone who can make things appear or disappear, who can create worlds, and you can give life to ordinary things. And when I put you sky, oh sky, in that meaningless hair of grass, and when I'll destroy you, and when I'll pluck you from the heat of the sun, oh you, stone made of ice, and when I'll begin with you, oh you, my step, you, march of the word, and when I'll blow into your marvelous flute of the voice, and when I will put you in the language of the flower and the sea, that will be what will be left for me? The grass is a treasure, the stone is a treasure, the word and the voice, the sea and the wind is a treasure. It is a poem from Atanas Vangel, of Macedonian poet as well. Lajos Koneski claims that a poet should be discovered, not created, yet it is a process of recognition. When a poet recognizes his poem, he writes it down immediately, and that is why some poets are being delusional when they think that they have written the poem in a very short period of time. But there is a process of triple act: the act of tradition, the act of collective matters, and the author. He says, we combine the ideas, we cross the contents and we go into the details in the process of connecting the phonetic material and the lexical material. And all of that in accordance with the need of expression in the collective and the author in a specific time reference. And that is how the poem is being recognized. All a thought, a sentence, a saying, an unexpected correlation between the words in a specific life situation, rudimentary fact full of emotional electricity with one word. Natural form can be used as basis for the poem. It is similar with the process of uncovering the layers of soil. You can see the object buried in the ground first, and then you should be very careful in taking off the ground out of the object until it is uncovered at the end. Uncovering of the poem means rising a rudimentary object, but with an emotional potential to a higher level, to a poetic plane that can be achieved only by a poetic comment. And just like William Wordsworth says in his Poetry and Poetic Diction, that poetry is born in the everyday use of the language and in the simple life, with the simple people, where the emotion is not censored. He too believes that the poem is written by life experience. In his poem Poetics, he says, I picked the poems from the tree of life, just like the peasants before Spirit's Day pick ripe cherries from the cherry trees. And in his poem about the conceiving with the poem, he writes, the thoughts are not differentiated with no rhythm. What comes first, the thought or the rhythm, so we could feel as a music? And the music was not born out of nothing, but from the cut made by thought with a thought. Thus, the prime thing is the thing that we return to at the end. The first is like a fog, an idea that cannot be seen clearly. Radovan Pavlovsky, Macedonian poet, in his poem Master of the Pen, just confirms what was already said. He says, with my look in the two hills of the cracked pen, inside sky I found myself, and my interior is something I cannot see. The words being separated from the darkness, says Archaic in his poem A Birth of a Poem, and the silence is giving birth to the word according to Milovan Stevanovsky. He says, the blood and the glass cannot stand each other. Maybe that is why it hurts so much before a word is said, crumbled and targeted. According to Veles Milevsky, another scholar and poet, Macedonian poet, poem is infinite. The poem is like a living creature. She knows what Adam and Eve were talking about under the tree. She gave birth to Homer. She's the poem of the poems. She's a reptile that crawls on the ground and a bird at the same time with its freedom in its wings. Poem is a sign. She does not explain, but she represents. And it is very interesting how many poets make comparisons between their poem and a bird. For example, Albanian poet Adem Gaiteni writes, you distant bird of mine, you're so distant, distant, distant. Why do you change your appearances, your face, your eye, as soon as you land on my hand? I invent you a right wing, but your left wing already flies on the sky, so perfect and unreachable. This is metonymical and metaphorical relationship. According to Archibald MacLeish, in his poem Ars Poetica, poem is like a fruit. I will read all the poem, and that will be the ending of my speech. He says, a poem should be a palpable and mute as a globed fruit, dumb as all medallions to the thumb, silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement latches where the moss has grown. A poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs, living as the moon releases Twig by twig, the night entangles trees, leaving as the moon behind winter leaves. Memory by memory, the mind. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. A poem should be equal to, not true, for all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf. For love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. A poem you should not mean, but be. I will finish my speech with one poem. I'm the author of the poem. It is a very short one, and it tells the way I see the creation of a poem. The title of the poem is the words silhouette. The silhouette of the word that looks for its own image in the mirror of the night leans on the eyelids of the window and inhabits the look over a cup of tea in a teary, timeless morning. Thank you for your attention.
Our pleasure, ma'am. Thank you so much, Dr. Treshkovska, for sharing the treasure of your knowledge with us. We are really indebted to you. Thank you so much. But there's one question that has been asked for you by Mr. Vishwajit Chattopadhyay, and he wants to know, in your view, what is the relationship between poetry and the subconscious mind?
I cited Jung during my presentation, as you noticed. Maybe that's why she asked the question. I think that his unconscious has a very important role in the creation of a poem. And all of the poets that I cited, for example, Blaže Konecký, Venko Andonovský, Milovan Stevanović, and all of the poets in their poems claim that. All of them say that they don't know what the poem is. And it is contradictory when you're the poet, you write the poem, but you don't know where your poem comes from. So that will be the answer. The poem lies in us. We are connected with our unconsciousness and what we feel as our tradition and the influence of collective issues influence us. That's why we are not so much aware of during the process of creation. And also Vasko Popa, one of the most prominent Serbian poets, the poet that I cited the most, says exactly that when he tries to answer the question, what is your poem? What is your relationship with the poem? And by the end of his writings, we can conclude that the poem is something that has own entity. And the point is to, when we create the poem, to leave it stand by herself, to speak for herself.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doctor. It was a pleasure listening to you. There's one more question, which is not directed to any particular speaker, but it is open for any of the speakers to take it, whether it is Dr. Daniela, Professor Garcia, Dr. Janet, or Mr. Michael Forrester. I'll read the question as it came to me by Dr. Harprasad Ray. Imagination is a way of seeing this world through a different lens. We are living in a world of objective reality, which is pivoted upon material experience and its rational excellence. And in that materialistic world, do you think, madams and sir, the subject like romanticism is contemporary? If any one of the speakers would like to answer this.
Romanticism is contemporary.
I think since we ended with Dr. Daniel, I would request her if she would like to take up the question.
Thank you. Well, what we see as modern literature today is something that we cannot define. just with one definition. So we say that modern poets are the poets that are from the 20th century, maybe. And there are some lots of literary, how to say, movements in this modernistic point of view. There are symbolism, surrealism, futurism, and so on. And Romanticism was one point of view that was abandoned when modernism came. But I see on this question in a more progressive way. Why not? Everything that exists today has a right to exist, of course, and to be accepted as modern. I noticed when I edited the two of the literary magazines that I edited in Macedonia, I noticed different styles among the authors. I noticed that some of the authors use traditional styles and some features of romanticism, of course, realistical ones, surrealistical. So there are many different styles, and we should embrace all of them. That is my opinion.
I hope
Thank you.
satisfied with the answer. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Madam Daniela. With this, we come to an end of this webinar. And, ends are very painful, of course. But that also, promises for a new beginning. And here I can remember a line of Shelley that if winter comes, can spring be far behind? So on this note, I here request our chief coordinator, Professor Shakil Ahmed, to present the customary vote of thanks. Professor Shakil Ahmed.
Sir, you're on unmute, sir. Please unmute yourself, sir.
Good evening, everybody. We have come to the last part of our program, and I express my heartfelt thanks to Professor Lalita G. Garcia for being with us and for her wonderful deliberations. I'd also like to thank Dr. Daniela Etrajovskova for her valuable speech. I'd also like to thank from the core of heart to Dr. Janit C. Pascual for her beautiful views. And at last, I'd like to thank Michael Forrester for delivering his generous views. I'd also like to thank all those who have taken hard toil to make the webinar a great success. And special thanks to Shankar Sarkar, who is the key man for managing such a wonderful program for us. And I'd like to thank all the members of the Hitaishi family for joining us and for contributing a lot to make the program a successful one. With that, thank you all. Once again, I thank all the members. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With this, I would request everyone to please switch on their camera, all the speakers and the organizers, so that we could have a group photograph before we leave.
Even the participants can also put on their videos?
Yes, everybody can put on their videos.
Okay, so let's have a group photograph digitally.
Okay, thank you, everyone. With this, we come to the end of this event, and we make sure that we will plan some more events for you of this kind. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.